I don't really know why I set foot in the barber's shop. I'd been happily cutting my own hair for about a year or so. Plus, it was Saturday and the place was heaving with sweaty, time-starved 9-to-5ers. After a small ice age, a glum Northern Irishman in his 20s led me to his chair with the congeniality of an overworked executioner. "What are you looking for?" "I dunno," I said, as an exclamation rather than a statement of fact, and was on the verge of delivering a very specific brief on exactly what I was looking for when he interrupted. "We've been sat waiting 45 minutes, you've had plenty of time to think about it." I gave the stink eye to the mirror and reached for a magazine. "Do whatever you think." The small mercy at least was that he wasn't going to be chatty, although the work of a barber, barbarism? Barbarity? Is a strangely intimate act, made all the stranger when you and he have decided to hate one another. My friend Jane, who has suffered much at the hands and small talk of the hairdressing profession, once came up with a very smart business idea for a place called Shut the Cut Up. The genius of it is that you get to specify the exact style you want in advance via a comprehensive online form. As soon as you walk in the door, the receptionist puts her finger up to her lips to shush you while she hands you a book, also chosen in advance from their vast library of vintage Penguin novellas. For the duration of your encounter, the only sounds to be heard are the clicking of scissors, the turning of pages, and the sipping of pink champagne. My barber raised the check out the back of your head mirror like a jaded air steward demonstrating the life jackets on a flight that would not be going over water. I made the closest thing to an appreciative noise I could muster without being sick in my mouth, then paid him, tipped him, and ventured out into the world to begin my new life as a man with terrible hair. I've always felt an affinity for the Merovingian kings who administered haircuts as punishment. When their queen Crodegildis was forced to choose between her grandsons being tonsured or killed, she wisely went for option B. There was a woman who understood the shame of being shorn, and saw that life without flowing locks was simply not worth living. 6th century France in general seems to have had a very sensible attitude to all things hirsute. Not only was it the birthplace of the handlebar moustache, but maintained a strict hierarchy when it came to hair length. The ruling families were allowed to look like Brad Pitt in Legends of the Fall, while the middling sort were left with a kind of Angela Merkel bowl cut. Meanwhile, the dregs of society were condemned to the Sinead O'Connor. And though this sounds frivolous, they were far from frivolous about it. According to the Burgundian law code, you could be heavily fined for giving a slave a wig. While the French themselves tend to see the short-haired Carolingians as their earliest forebears, and Charlemagne as the first truly French king, an important part of their national character is definitely derived from earlier, hairier times. It was the French, after all, who began the 18th century arms race that gave rise to the expression big wig. Hairpieces then became so truly enormous that some society ladies were found to have mice nesting in them. While the French Revolution put the kibosh on the mega-toupees of yore, I like to think that the spirit of these karakamoutic adventurers survives to this day and informs all the important work being done by scientists at the Laboratoire Garnier. 2 days after my haircut, I spotted my barber across a crowded bar. I knew him from somewhere, but it was only when I clocked his reflection in a mirror that the penny dropped. He was sitting in the midst of a group of friends who were laughing and chatting, but somehow he was not with them. I remember thinking he seemed alone despite the company. Then he realized I was staring at him, so I looked away. Hair, of course, in French is always plural, and I think that says a lot. Before Celine Dion had quite mastered English, you can see her slipping up in an interview with the telltale line, "My sister does my hairs." For Anglophones, it's an amorphous blob, my hair, that we pay very little attention to. Head hair, body hair, cat hair is something to be ignored, swept under the carpet, and assiduously vacuumed. The French, on the other hand, cherish each and every strand, linguistically combing them over and over again like a big Gallic mermaid. They even had the decency to come up with a different word, poil, for hair that's not on your head. Celine, of course, is not so much French as Quebecoise, a people whom the actual French regard as strange, squeaky clowns. Imagine how the most pretentious Englishman feels about a fat man in a MAGA hat, and you won't have come close to the disdain a Parisian down-and-out reserves for his Canadian cousins. You have to understand, a French woman once said to me, they don't just look so fucking stupid. They sound so fucking stupid. Quebecoise is more than a ridiculous accent. It preserves a lot of old language in aspic. The swear words are archaic religiosities like tabernacle and mon Christ. To the modern French ear, these aren't just quaint expressions. They are the mark of a people who missed out on the Enlightenment. And this is what makes Celine's story all the more compelling. Born into poverty, the youngest of 14 siblings, one of whom would go on to do her hairs, a chance encounter with a music producer named Renee, who was either the love of her life or a paedophile, depending on how romantic you're feeling, left her 5 Grammys and 6 Las Vegas runs later, standing in front of a stadium full of actual French people who had gathered there not to laugh and throw things, but to watch and applaud her. Has any Quebecoise ever soared so high? I doubt it. I know all this because Celine's version of the Roy Orbison song I Drove All Night begins with a video montage of her in packed arenas around the world, striding out onto the stage in tall leather boots and saying, "Is that all right, Moscow? Is that all right, Frankfurt? Is that all right, Dubai?" And even, "Is that all right, Paris?" Clearly, it was all right, despite how silly she sounded when she wasn't singing. I Drove All Night is a great song, if lyrically problematic, but I'm not sure it's destined to survive the Me Too era. I drove all night to get to you. Is that all right? I drove all night, crept in your room, woke you from your sleep, to make love to you. Is that all right? I drove all night. It definitely pays lip service to the concept of consent, with so many is that all rights, but the constant reminder that you drove all night makes it start to feel a bit of a quid pro quo. The implication is that the journey wasn't planned, it was impulsive, and the driver probably has nowhere to stay, which is why they want to sleep in your bed. Cyndi Lauper covered the song as well, and I've often wondered out of Cyndi, Celine and Roy, which would be more terrifying if they broke into your house in the middle of the night and tried to fuck you. It was about a week after I saw my barber in the bar that the missing posters started going up around town. If it wasn't for that chance encounter, I doubt I would have recognised the photo. Last seen 6 days ago, at 3 a.m, near the seafront in Hoth. Missing people in their 20s don't tend to show up again. You don't find out they went on a camping holiday and forgot to tell anyone, or decided to drive across the country in the middle of the night in the hopes of getting laid, but it didn't work out because it wasn't all right, and then they had to drive all the way back with their tail between their legs, and their pride has been hurt, but they're back now and they're home, and they're safe, and everything's going to be fine. I didn't need to see the newspaper article to guess what had happened, but by chance I did. And the age and the dates fit with the body that washed up a few days later. Christ, I thought. I mean, it wasn't a great haircut he gave me, but it wasn't that bad. Then I remembered that just because someone is a featured extra in your life doesn't mean they're not the lead in their own, or second billing in someone else's. Even so, I haven't been to a hairdresser's since. Call it superstition, or force of habit, or simply wanting to avoid the awkwardness of it all. For many years, if anyone ever asked me where I got my hair cut, I would tell them this story, and delight in the drama of it. The last man who cut my hair is dead. But the older I get, the more I see that it's dark and unsettling, and it's begun to make me sad. So these days I simply turn around, look them straight in the eye, and say, in my best crazy French accent, "Ma sister does my hairs."